Hello and welcome to season 4, episode 2 of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast. I'm host Joe Camps, and joining me this evening is a very special guest, Kevin Daly, president of the Teachers Association of Lee County. Kevin, thank you for joining me this evening.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate being here.
Well, it's a pleasure is all mine. I gotta say now, tonight's episode, for those that are listening, is titled Leadership, Advocacy, and the Future of Teaching. Once again, I had mentioned that our guest is president of the Teachers Association of Lee County, Kevin Daly. But once we'll get into explaining what exactly is the Teachers Association of Lee County, Kevin's role as president of the association, and the title of tonight's episode, really, which is supporting teachers, leaders in the county advocating for teachers, teachers advocating for themselves, as well as the future of the teaching profession, what everything that's going on in today's climate. But before we get into all that, Kevin, if you could please tell us a little bit about yourself, your educational journey, where you started, your profession, career, and what led to you currently as your role as president of the Teachers Association of Lee County.
So yeah, thanks. So I guess most importantly, I'm a seventh generation native Floridian. That's something that puts me in a real small group of people. But
It's a unicorn.
but I am. I'm also, like you had said, the current president of the Teachers Association of Lee County. This is my 8th year in that role. Prior to being elected to this, I was an ESE teacher at Royal Palm Exceptional School for 21 years. A lot of people may also not understand that I'm still currently an employee of the school district of Lee County. So, prior to me being elected to this, I was a 21-year veteran teacher at Royal Palm Exceptional School, and that's a ESE center school here in Lee County. It's K through 22. It's for students with behavioral and emotional disorders, and it is probably 1A in the best jobs I've ever had aside from this one. So yeah, it was a unique learning experience, and I had a lot of fun when I was there. But I'm desperately enjoying what I do now.
And if you could tell us, so what exactly is, for those who are not familiar with the Teachers Association of Lee County, what is it, and how does it support educators in Lee County?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So I mean, it's titled the Teachers Association of Lee County, but in practical terms, we have a 6,000 member bargaining unit, and we represent more than just teachers. We're going to talk about how old the organization is later, and I think when the organization was formed, it may have just represented teachers, but I like to say we represented all the certificated staff. So we have RNs, we have psychologists, we have OT, PT, classroom teachers, anybody who's got either an educational certificate or some kind of like licensure from the state fits into our bargaining group. So it's an incredibly diverse group, and it's an incredibly active group. And I'm happy to be I tell people all the time, I'm the current president of the Teachers Association of Lee County. There was somebody before me, and there will be somebody after me. So I'm just, happy to be in the role now, and really and trying to work with everybody and do our best to kind of assist the teachers. And so kind of our basic function is we're what's called the certified bargaining agent. So we along with other teachers, and that's another misnomer, I think. So one of the big things we do is bargain the contract. And so I'm going to put the same plug in I put other places. We are currently in bargaining. The next bargaining session, I think, is the last Monday of the month. It goes every other Monday from 4:30 to 7:30, and it is open to the public in the Caloosahatchee room. So I always advocate staff, especially teachers and other people in the bargaining unit come, but even the public is invited. It's important to note that the union isn't some third party organization. It's its members. And so the bargaining team is made up of, I think, 16 people, including Kerr. So it's 15 kind of employees, and then Kerr, who's one of our service unit directors. And so every member on the bargaining team, except for me, is a full-time classroom teacher or a full-time employee of the school district of Lee County. So they do their job all day in the classroom or in supporting students, either in special instructional or in another role. And then they come to bargaining every other Monday and bargain the collective bargaining agreement. That's one of the key things we do. We also offer assistance and support to teachers. Sometimes allegations are made against teachers. And so, we assist and support them through that process. We ensure that their due process is given to them, and, we provide support there. We also, not only in Lee County, but on a state level through the Florida Education Association, just advocate for public education in general. We want the best public schools in the nation and in the world here in Florida. And I think, as teachers, we're in the classroom and we see what's going on, and we're probably the best people to ask how to make things better because we're living the life every day. And so, I say it all the time. I represent the nurses, but if I don't ask a nurse what their problems are and what their solutions are, the only solution I can come up with will be bad. And so, it's one of those things where we really like to involve people and have people involved in sharing their stories and essentially directing us on what is best for them and their work environment and how we can best achieve that. And then we also do contract enforcement through a grievance process. So if there's an alleged contract violation and a member brings it, we represent them in the grievance process to ensure that the collective bargaining agreement is followed. So if somebody's not getting enough planning time, we meet with the administrator and we kind of lay out the schedule and we ensure that they get the planning time they're owed in the collective bargaining agreement, because that is essentially a kind of it's in the title, an agreement between the district and their employees about how things are going to happen and what's going to happen and how people are going to be treated. So one of the most crucial roles we have as well is that contract enforcement. And so that's where really the directors get involved. I tell people all the time, I'm just an old ESE teacher and I'm pretty good at ESE law, but I don't really know, I didn't stay at a Holiday Inn Express and I don't have a lifetime adult career in this work. And the good thing for the Teachers Association of Lee County and our sister union SPAL is our office staff has exactly that. Dr. Frazone is younger than me, but he's been doing the job a lot longer than me. And we have Cassie and Lois and all of them, and now Elizabeth, and they've all spent their adult lives kind of doing the work. So we're very blessed and lucky to have what I call the best and the hardest working staff in the state. And I kind of tell people I'll fight anybody that tells me different. So the teachers here in Lee County are lucky to have such a great staff, and I'm great. I'm lucky to be surrounded by executive board members and building reps who, tell me what I need to hear as opposed to telling me what I want to hear, and kind of hold us accountable to make sure we do what we need to do for people. And so that's kind of who we are and what we do in a nutshell.
And it's so powerful, I think, and impactful that us, and I can speak as an educator in Lee County and as a 21-year veteran and a member of TALC. I want to say all 21 years that I've been teaching down here in Lee County, listening to the educators, like you had said, the people that are inside the classrooms, taking our input, advocating for us, fighting for us, and then especially for the bargaining team, the bargaining unit, how you said they work their job full time, and then there's countless hours. I know not only at the bargaining table, but everything that goes behind the scenes that perhaps we don't see. And Kevin is absolutely right. It is something that you should go see if you have the ability or the opportunity to go attend the bargaining session. I have attended, my fair share over the years, and just actually understand the inner workings of what happens during collective bargaining and understanding really what's at stake. And that kind of leads me to this next question, because for many of the listeners that listen to the podcast or they live outside of Florida. And sometimes you hear it depends where you're from, and then collective bargaining and right to work. So I'm from New York, and I grew up with a family of educators, and they were all in, the New York City, union, teachers union for New York City. And it seemed like it was different. I want to say not a right to work state, but in Florida, I didn't, correct me if I'm wrong, right? We're a right to work state. Can you explain what that is and really what collective bargaining is and how did that start in Florida?
So in the year 1968, educators, and this is a common story from 1968 all the way to 2026, right? Educators felt undervalued, underpaid, underappreciated. And so they engaged in mass resignations. And as part of as part of kind of the work back to work, the come back to work, collective bargaining was added to our state constitution. So they used to tell us we're the only state that has it, but I think there might be another one that has the right to collectively bargain in our state constitutions. I know in places like in South Carolina, for example, they don't have collective bargaining, and essentially the legislature meets and sets all the salary, and it's all done through that process. But here, each county in Florida now has, I think the last one was just kind of re-added a couple of years ago up in the Panhandle. But every county has, a union that supports the educational staff and the support staff, whether it's the same one or they're separate ones. And so kind of collective bargaining is the mechanism by which we talk about and we vote on and we determine our working conditions, our salary. I like to tell teachers that, from the start of your day to the end of your day, almost everything you come in contact with is in that collective bargaining agreement. It's planning time. It's the amount of time for lunch. It's the amount of preps you're supposed to have. It's almost everything that touches your day is in that collective bargaining agreement. And yeah, Florida is also a right to work state. We often say that means it's a right to work for less state. Many of the states in the Rust Belt and the Northeast, what used to be called closed shop states. And that means, you essentially had to be a member unless you only wanted to pay agency fees. But in a lot of places, the agency fees were almost as much as the dues were. So people joined anyway. But the Janus decision of the Supreme Court, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years ago, kind of wiped out the whole kind of closed shop idea. It's not nationwide right to work. I think that's something that some politicians in Washington would like to move to a nationwide right to work rule where, the Florida rules existed everywhere. I used to, I don't think it's the best. I think, unions are best when they're strongest, and they're strongest when they have an engaged large membership. But there's also another side that I've come to think about, which is especially when the Janus decision was happening, which is these states that had been closed shop states had never had to talk to anybody about the union because you simply got a job and then you had to be a member. So early on, they were calling Florida, kind of asking them, well, how do you recruit members? So I think as bad as it is overall, it does add a layer of, kind of accountability, right? I've got to provide, some level of relief or some level of representation or something to people. And so, in a right to work state, that level of transparency and accountability, which is something I'm happy with. I'm glad I have to produce for people, for them to do it. And, teachers are chronically underpaid and support staff is 90% of them live beneath the poverty level. And so for people to take money out of their paycheck and give it to our organization for us to, represent them and bargain their contract and do all the things we do, that means that they've invested and they have faith and we're producing good results for them. So from like that angle, it kind of makes us be accountable to the people that are our constituency. And that's never a bad thing. And I do want to say, maybe you can kind of edit this somewhere else. Bargaining is also on the district's YouTube channel. The sound quality and the video quality is not great because we do it in a conference room. And, that was a kind of an outbreak offshoot of COVID. And so we had the bargaining go live. And I'm also very glad that bargaining is in the sunshine. Again, I'm a big fan of things being in the sunshine. Ron Irusius, which is he's our kind of main contact person with the district when we have problems. He comes from Ohio. He says in Ohio, the bargaining happens in a closed door room between the union and the district, and it's not open to the public, and nobody can talk about it. And there's just this magical deal produced, and it's presented to people. And I find that kind of scary as well. I want people there. I want to know if I say something crazy and they look at me like I'm crazy. So I'm happy it's in the sunshine, and I wish we could get all 6,000 people there. But But the right to work thing definitely has more drawbacks than it has advantages. But one of the things that I've come to learn in my time is that it forces us to be good stewards and to be responsible and to be reactive and to, kind of service our members so that they feel like there's value for the money they give. Cause, teachers are chronically underpaid and support staff is kind of around the poverty line. So it's overall bad, but as far as the accountability piece, I think it's a positive. I'm glad I have to produce a product and work hard for the members in Lee County so that they find value in what we're doing and they trust us with, some of their money every paycheck.
And we do. I'd have to say once again, as we could talk probably for hours about the pay situation, right? What
Right.
that whole thing, and it's every dollar counts, every penny counts, right? When you're stretching paycheck to paycheck, and then you have to make a choice, a conscious choice. Like,
Right.
do I want my money to go towards, any sort of like fees or dues or membership, whatever it may be, or not? But I feel, and once again, this is just my own personal experience and opinion, is that what you are given for your union dues, your membership dues, compared to knowing that you are part of this larger kind of, I don't want to say unit, but just this family in a way, it's just looking out and supporting like-minded, individuals. And I think that's something that's really important, especially with people that are new to the profession, because there are so many things that are happening with legislation and just, locally in our state, nationally. And sometimes you walk into the profession just unaware, just because you don't have the experience or, and then you get blindsided sometimes. And
Right.
well, where's I need representation or what's going on here. So I really do believe strongly that it is something that educators, veteran, if they're kind of on the fence, should I, can I, pay the membership? Can I not? Everyone's got their own kind of personal, decisions to make. Young educators, new educators, the profession, career changers. And one thing is me just going on a little kind of soapbox. I think it is very important that you do educate yourself on what is happening and understand that you do have rights, uh,
Yes.
as an educator, which now you had talked about sunshine. And what does that exactly mean in the sunshine? Because you had said about in Ohio, like kind of closed door deals, like the room where it happens, so to speak, right? You want to all be in
Right.
the room where it happens, the quote Hamilton. But what does it mean for those that are unaware to be in the sunshine and have these meetings?
So Florida has great public records laws. I mean, they really do. And they also, in the sunshine just means out in the open where anybody can come and anybody can observe. And Florida has really Florida doesn't do a lot of things great, but one of the great things they have is their sunshine laws and their open records laws. Just this past, I know we're going to talk about legislative session, but just this past session, there was an effort to kind of close some of that sunshine in on the Public Employees Relation Commission. And Florida respects its sunshine and its public records laws so much that it takes a two-thirds majority, a two-thirds vote to restrict any kind of closing of the sunshine or closing of the laws. And so that bill didn't make it out of its committee because even though the politicians didn't agree on everything else, they almost unanimously agreed on the idea that sunshine and open record laws are a good idea because like somebody, like they used to say, right, sunshine is the best disinfectant. And so by having things out in the open and by having things people coming and people observing and it being on YouTube, all of that stuff, it just makes everybody so much more informed and so much more involved. And it's really, really great to be able, like we have labor management. That's an open meeting. Insurance task force is an open meeting. All of our committee meetings are open meetings. So, I mean, I can't think of a single thing we do that doesn't have the ability for anybody in the world to come and sit in the room and listen to what's being said. And this is how I try to plug bargaining, which is like, these are decisions that are going to affect you. So I want you to hear the conversation and I want you to email me and provide me input and stop me after bargaining, because
Yeah.
these are decisions that affect you, like the amount of lunch, like we just went to a 30-minute duty-free lunch. People may not say that's, oh my God, 30 minutes, but it had been 25 for 100 years. And so, we got 5 more minutes, which is a lot when you're,
In teacher
struggling
world,
with
it's a
25.
lot.
When you're in
It's
teacher world, that 5 minutes is a lot, right?
That's your
So,
bathroom break.
right. That's your bathroom break. I mean, my sister is in banking, and when she comes over for the holidays, we go out to lunch sometimes or dinner, and she always like is bothering me about how quickly I eat. And I'm like, listen, I grew up on a 20-minute lunch clock. If
Yep.
you don't really get to 25, because even
Uh,
if you say you don't have kids for 25, you still got to get your food. You still got to heat it up. So
uh,
it's like a 20-minute clock. So she's always like, bothering me. Even after 8 years in this position where I'm not actively in a classroom, I'm still like trained to follow that 25-minute clock. And so it's very important for people, that are going to be affected by these things to be aware of them. And I can't imagine the idea that 3 or 4 people would meet in a closed door room and there would be no access, and all of a sudden there would be a deal. And it's like, whoa,
mhm.
like I want to hear the conversation. And I tell people too, come down and listen. Sometimes wacky stuff gets said. Sometimes we say wacky stuff. Sometimes wacky stuff gets said. And I think it's important
Yeah.
for people to hear everything that's said. And again, it just makes for a more and well informed group of people in the group. And it makes for, more transparency and certainly more responsiveness to the people. If you're in a bargaining session and there are 150 teachers, sitting in the room with you,
Yeah.
kind of watching everything that goes on and listening to what's happening. And so that's really for me the most powerful part about it is the whole idea that it's all got to be out in the open and it's the best thing ever. And listen, go to Lee County School District's YouTube channel if you want. And I think there are archived bargaining sessions, and there will definitely be one on the last Monday of the month live. I will tell you the sound stinks and the cameras aren't great because we're in a conference room instead of in a room set up to be, taped and recorded. So, but it's okay. It certainly beats the alternative, which is
Of
in a
course.
in a
Yeah.
small room without anybody seeing or hearing anything that's going on.
No, no, absolutely. And so talking a little bit more about TALF, I'd like to kind of bring up 50th anniversary, correct? TALF
Yeah,
celebrating
this
50
yeah,
years. So
this
what's,
year is our
yeah.
50th anniversary.
And have you seen, for those that don't know the history, obviously, and you're kind of educating us about it, what your role is with the Teachers Association
Right.
of Lee County supporting. Have you, since you started, your career in Lee County and then just even being, in Florida, living in Florida prior to teaching, have you seen it evolve over those 50 years? Clearly, I mean, but you had talked about 1968.
Yeah.
We're still experiencing here in 2026. So has there really been, significant change, or do you feel like for the better, for the worse over these past 50 years, and like with how TALF has been supporting educators?
Yeah, I mean, again, so the law passed in '68, and then it took a few years for everybody to like get their stuff together and actually form the groups. And we're celebrating 50 this year, and a lot of unions around the state are celebrating their 50th. But I think it's really it has grown, and I think it's grown more powerful. And I think another idea of kind of where we are, and I talk about this sometimes, is like in Florida, there's not a history of unionism. Like you said, you came from New York City, right? Family of educators were all in a union. Your uncle might have been a police officer. He was in a union. Your aunt might have been a nurse. She was in a union. So there was like this, people went to the union hall on Labor Day. Maybe they had their wedding receptions there, right? And so down here, we're also we are the biggest union in the county. Richie with the painters who does City of Cape Coral, City of Fort Myers, and City of Sanibel kind of is neck and neck with us. But again, we've really grown from where the district was in 1968, or for us 50 years ago, to where we are now. And I think we've seen a steady increase in not only the number of employees but also the number of members. And I think sometimes a few years back I kind of did the math, and sometimes we're so blinded by what we're in that we don't realize what we're a part of. And so Talc is the eighth largest education union in the state of Florida.
Really?
But again, that makes sense because we're
Yeah.
kind of the ninth biggest district, right?
Yeah, we're a
But
very large district.
and that's honestly kind of a big deal to be,
Yeah.
they're the megas. We're kind of, it's between us and Polk, and we go back and forth. We're kind of that very top of the non-megas, the Hillsborough, the Duvals, the Miami-Dade, the Broward, that whole mega group. We're kind of, Polk and I go back and forth. Stephanie and I go back and forth about which one is bigger at any one time. I think I've got her about a couple hundred people now. So yeah, we're kind of the biggest in that, just under the mega district group. And honestly, that's kind of a big deal,
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
I think it's important we celebrate and we tell people about it. But sometimes you think, well, I go back 28 years as an employee, right? And this is my 29th year. And I look and I go, well, gee, when I first started, how many high schools were there, right? How many students were there? I mean, we're over 100,000 students. We got 13, 14 high schools. I mean, this is, and Talc has grown more in size and in influence every year since its founding. And I think that's a testament to the work that my predecessors have done and the work that we've done. And like I said, kind of I don't want to say the value, but kind of the importance that people see in the work that we do, and their ability to say, I want to be a part of it. And really, we also did the math, like our dues. So you work, 70 hours or 71 hours or whatever over 2 weeks. Our dues amount is really 1 hour of one day's pay per pay period for a new teacher. So really, when you think about it, yes, it's an expense, but it's 1 hour of your 70 something hours
Mhm.
for a new teacher over the pay period. And of course, it's less of a percentage as you go on, right? But it's always, the new teachers are the lowest paid right now. And so we kind of talk about it like that, where it's 1 hour of one pay period of one day pays for your dues and protects your rights, and assures you a voice on the job, because without us, the district is able to kind of do whatever they want without anybody kind of saying, hey, wait a minute, we don't think that's right, or we really need to talk about that. And so without Talc and our sister union Falk around, the district is pretty much able to do whatever they want to do. And that's sometimes kind of a needed check and balance against the power of the school board and the superintendent and the buildings.
So, in your opinion, then for new teachers that are entering the profession, you kind of touched on this a little bit. So, just to recap, why do you think it's important? What's kind of talking about teachers that are new to the profession. So, why would you say that
So,
it's important for them to understand the history of teacher advocacy?
right. So, we're a union, right? And sometimes that gets a bad rap, and it's a bad word places. But I like to you use the word union because we're a union. But what I kind of like to tell people as well, like, is if you were a doctor, you'd be in the AMA. If you were an attorney, you'd be admitted to the bar. If you were, this is a union, but it's also your professional organization. And so from that standpoint as well, I can't think of an attorney who wouldn't want to be in the bar. I can't think of a doctor who wouldn't want to be in the AMA. I mean, the American Psychological Association is kind of the organization for psychologists. It's just when you're with our group, you get the extra added benefits of having power and voice in your workplace. And so that's what I think a lot of the stuff we talked about earlier is a lot of the frustration among teachers today and education in general is people who have never done the job, won't do the job, and don't understand the job, and won't listen to you about what you need to do your job, are more than happy to make binding decisions about what your job looks like without really talking to you. And like I always reference the nurses. If I don't call Michael, who's one of the nurse reps, and say, hey, what do you think here? Or what do you need? It can't help but be a bad decision because I have very little experience knowing what nurses need, but I know Michael does, and he'll be more than happy to tell me, and then I can advocate on their behalf with him, kind of to get them what they need to make their employment experience, as fruitful as possible and as meaningful as possible.
Now, you had mentioned about decisions being made from non-educators, which is, I feel, a perfect segue into Senate Bill 1296. And really, there's been a lot of discussion around Florida Senate Bill 1296 for educators who may not fully understand this bill. Can you explain what it is and why it matters to teachers?
Yeah, so Senate Bill 1296, just an update for anybody who doesn't know, it passed the Florida House yesterday, so it is currently sitting on Governor DeSantis's desk to sign, and he's going to sign it. But what it does, and it affects more than teachers. And the real tragedy for me here is somehow this is always being spun as like a teacher bill, a teacher bill, a teacher bill. But to be honest with you, I keep harping back to Richie and the painters. They're city employees too, so it affects them. It affects, non-first responders who may work for the sheriff's department, 911 operators. So it really affects a large swath of public sector employees. And what this bill does is it essentially, again, in, you know, puts arbitrary requirements and loopholes and regulations on what it takes for these very organizations to exist and to continue to advocate for their members. And like I told you earlier, I was doing an interview with the news press, and it really boggles my mind that the legislators in Tallahassee, with the car insurance problem, the health insurance problem, the gas prices, the food prices, the cost of living crisis, the rent crisis, the interest rate crisis, with all of these problems, they're choosing to advance legislation that makes it harder for public sector workers to organize and maintain their organization and have a voice on their job and have a say in what they do. And I think, when you look at it like that, it's like, why? And really the response from every educator I've spoken to is why? Why do you think you need this? And why aren't you solving the real, as I said at my kitchen table, the real kitchen table issues
Yeah.
that affect everybody in Florida every day? I mean, this economy in Florida is killing people. Like, I have a second job, even as president of Talc. I drive a little Uber on the weekends, right? So not even the president of the union is immune from having to supplement his income. And so, like, in this world in Florida where, just everything seems to be, causing your money to disappear more rapidly than you earn it, their solution is to advance bills that make it more difficult for public sector workers to organize, to stay organized, and to have a voice on their job, to advocate for each other. Because it's all well and good to say, well, you can advocate for yourself, but you work in a school and have. What are the odds that a single teacher is going to go to their boss or going to go to the superintendent and tell them there's a problem? I mean, the joy of me being me is I'm able to do that. They can't retaliate against me. They can't fire me. So I have the ability to be that kind of stick in their side or in their eye about things, where other, single teachers probably wouldn't feel comfortable or wouldn't really be able to advocate on their own. And if the worst case scenario happens around 1296, it will be just that. It will be kind of an every person would have the opportunity to negotiate everything on their own, which sounds good until you realize there are 6,000 employees and there's no way the district would entertain that. And what happens if there's an allegation? Well, you'd have to hire your own attorney. Some of the portion about being in our organization is if there's an allegation, you get representation from the office to ensure the due process and things as we, kind of help you through the process. And then if something happens at the state, you get an attorney as part of your membership. So again, with this whole focus on, but the focus should be on making it easier on Floridians to afford their bills, to pay their bills, to have a good job. One job pays the bills, have health insurance that's affordable and useful, have a good retirement set up, and maybe go on vacation every once in a while without having to worry. Their attention seems to be solely squared on the idea of making it difficult for public sector unions to organize, stay organized, and advocate.
Now we're up for recertification yearly. That's pretty recent, correct? And I believe 60% membership
Yeah.
is needed. How does that look like? What are the struggles that you have experienced as, president of TAL? And now what could happen once we have this new law, once it gets signed? And because we could lose things like our what pay raises, duty free lunch. I mean, basically, if I understand, once again, if I was misspeaking, please let me know. The contract essentially is ripped up; it's null and void. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct. So I guess I can best describe this whole scenario as like the death of 1,000 cuts. So a few years ago, they enacted what was, Senate Bill 256. And so what that did is that took away payroll deduction for public sector unions. It didn't do it for first responders. So police, fire, and corrections were able to maintain their payroll deduction, but it took away payroll deduction for public sector workers. And so overnight, we had no members. So the good news is FEA had been developing a system kind of with the expectation that this may happen eventually. And so we were really easy. It was really easy for us to roll out and kind of get everybody converted over. And then they had a 50% rule. You had to have 50% membership to stay. And so we met that. And then a couple of years ago, they also did, as part of, I think, 256, they moved it to a 60% threshold. So you've got to have a 60% threshold of members to maintain your annual certification with PERC. And now people have to sign a form that essentially says, even though I understand it's a right to work state, I have still made the choice as a grown up to join my union. So there's a form everybody has to sign when they join. And if they don't sign the form, they don't count. And so, and so now the new kind of tweak to this new bill, 1296, is that it really addresses the ability of us to recertify. So if we have the 60% threshold, everything's fine. And I'm very proud of Tal. Each one of the past 2 years that we've been subject to the 60%, we've met it. So we haven't had to go through the other process. And we're fairly positive we're going to meet it this year. Kind of daily membership fluctuates sometimes. So it's kind of not really worth talking about where we're at today versus because
Yeah, because it changes. Yeah.
You get two or three, couple of people leave the district, so it's kind of a back and forth. So there's a date certain in July where we'll need to be at 60%. And I suspect that, again, through the great work of my building reps, because me and Kurt and Lois and Cassie and Elizabeth can't be everywhere. So it's really the building reps in the buildings doing the lion's share of this work, recruiting members, getting the form signed, all this stuff that I really expect we'll make it again. But if we don't, we then have to collect what's called showing of interest cards. And we have to get 30% of the bargaining unit to sign those. And then I guess I would be the person that has to drive them to Tallahassee and hand them in. So I have to drive them to Tallahassee and hand them in. The state then verifies, and then we get an election. And this is one of the key changes to the law now. The rules for the election used to be it's almost like a quorum. The quorum was whoever participated. So if you had 300 people participate, even though you had 1,000 possible people participate, the result was based on the 300, which is how every other election is run, right? All of these representatives are elected from districts that have 250,000 people, right? 20,000 or 30 or 40,000 on a good year show up and make the difference. So in every other election, for every other thing, the quorum is who participates, and you have to have a majority of that quorum to maintain your certification. Well, now they've changed it to where 50%, at least 50% of the bargaining unit has to participate. So for talc, I like to throw the number 6,000 around. It's a little under, a little over, but 6,000 is a good number to look at, kind of the talk math. So, 6,000 people are eligible. So everybody would get a ballot mailed to their house. They would fill it out and they would have to mail it back. And we would need 3,001 people to have returned a ballot to meet the first criteria. Even if we had 58% membership or 59% membership and only 48% of the people mailed back a ballot, we would lose our union. And so as we move forward, if we have to do that, it's going to be imperative that we, again, have to do work we shouldn't have to do in order to maintain a thing here, at least in Lee County, that almost a supermajority of people that have opted into it. And so you get an election, they get mail ballots, they mail them back. They're going to have to count how many, send them in. That's the first hurdle. And then out of that group of people that have sent them in, you have to get, I thought it was 60%, but I heard today maybe it was 50, but you have to get at least the majority, possibly 60% of the people who have voted when it's more than half the bargaining unit to say that they want their union. And then you essentially live to fight another year. And every year you have to go through this process of either being at 60% and not worrying about it, or going through this kind of convoluted process to justify your existence and justify the fact that people, in your county want the group that's representing them to continue to represent them. So it's just one of those things where it's just, and again, these numbers are arbitrary. There's no, the representatives and senators in Tallahassee don't have to have 50% of their constituents in an election to participate, so for the election to be valid. Police and fire and corrections have again been exempted from this. So it kind of creates a two class and a two tier system among public workers where teachers and other public sector workers have to meet these random and arbitrary deadlines and criteria, and police and fire and corrections don't. And so
Just
that's another kind of thing.
it just goes to show that if you're an educator, especially in the state of Florida, that it's imperative that you pay close attention to, legislation, like what is happening. Because if you're unaware, and many of us are unaware, that we have to have the 50% or really 51%, and then just that's such a large number because we have such a
Right.
large membership in our county, because once again we're one of the larger districts in the state of
Right.
Florida. All the work that has to go into that, and it's honestly mind boggling to kind of hear the process now. Just the not for this to be completely disheartening to educators in Florida or in Lee County. That would be a scenario if we did not meet the 60% membership by our July date. This would be if we had to go to the showing of interest. Is that correct? If we met 60% membership, then you wouldn't have to go through. When I say you, I mean
Yeah.
the teachers.
If we
Have
meet
to go through that.
60%, we meet 60%. We don't have to do anything else. We just, again, we have to provide our membership authorization forms to the accountant because there's a process, right? So
Mhm.
you have to have a Florida certified accountant kind of do a forensic thing, and you have to present them with the MAFs, and then the accountant certifies that everything's cool and tells Perk, and then Perk says, well, if the accountant says it's cool, you're good for another year. But that's again, and it's always been an annual thing. But again, these arbitrary kind of rules that don't really seem to make much sense are putting a heightened awareness on it. And I think you hit on something earlier when you said essentially the collective bargaining agreement goes in the trash. And so for teachers, that's duty free lunch. That's the amount of planning time you get. That's the amount of preps you can have. That's the idea that honestly, we're salaried employees. The only place our workday is defined at is in the contract. So if the contract goes away, like a lot of other salaried employees, they could say, well, we want you to start working an 8-hour day and we're not going to pay you. We want you, we're having these events on Saturday. We need you to come. I mean, all of those kind of guardrails are in place in the collective bargaining agreement. And if it goes away, I mean, even insurance, I mean, I know people are unhappy insurance went up and I'm unhappy insurance went up. I mean, I'm on the same insurance as everybody else, but honestly, the first, because we meet once a month, the first Thursday of the month, and kind of the first option from the district was to make deductibles $10,000 and $30,000 for people.
Oh,
Right? Like
wow.
that was
Yeah.
part of option A because
Wow.
you can't run a deficit and you got to fix it. And so again, to be in the room where it happens, if we're not in the room where it happens, and
Mhm.
again, I'm not saying this to scare people, and I'm not saying this to say you should give us your money, even if we're not doing a good job, because if you're a member of the organization, you own the organization too, and you should be bothering us if we're not doing a good job. You shouldn't just say, well, I'm a member and they suck. You should say, I'm a member and I'm going to make sure they do the right thing. But if we're not in that room, they can do what they want to do and just say, well, here is the insurance moving forward. Have a great day. And so, it's really vital. And it's really kind of crazy to think that in a right to work state, this law has essentially made it to where if you want the protections that the contract offers, you have to join, which is almost counter to the idea of right to work, right?
Mhm.
And so it's just crazy that we're where we're at, but this is where we're at, and this is like I've been telling people, we are going to rise to the occasion and meet the criteria, and we're going to keep it moving, and we're going to keep growing, and hopefully by the time, because I'm not term limited, but I am 30 years in education limited the end of next school year, and so hopefully by the time I'm done, we're up to 65% or maybe even 70%, and we don't have to worry about excuse me, we don't have to worry about these rules and we're safely above a cushion, but we're not there yet. I mean, at some point we will break the ceiling and it's what we did with 50. We flirted with 50 for a while and then we finally broke it and we stayed there and we kept growing. So at some point we'll like break the 60 and always be over 60. and get to 65 and be fine, or maybe even 70. But again, it almost seems counterintuitive that now if you want the protection of the contract and you like what's in the contract, you have to join. Whereas before this law passed, essentially everybody got, as a right to work state, everybody got the same raise.
Yeah.
Everybody got the same working conditions, even if they weren't a member. Well, now, if you want to keep it, now they're almost taxing you to maintain your contract, which is, like I said, kind of counter to the whole right to work idea. But,
Yeah, it's
it is what it is.
unintentional. Yeah, that, but
Right.
yeah, it's something. Now, there's a lot of misinformation out there. Depending on what social media site you go on and what who you're friends with and all those
Right.
things regarding unions and legislation, all those things. And I think a big misconception, and maybe it's not in our county, it could be elsewhere, that union dues, membership fees. So there are articles out there and blogs and opinions of, well, really, an employer of an employee's unionship membership due goes to these special interest groups, and it goes to this and that and funds this, but that's not true as far as I know. I give my membership dues for talent for the union, it's not to go support a politician but I feel like that's out there. And can you just address that?
Yeah. So honestly, we have a separate pack, and our pack can do school board races locally. And I think we can also do kind of statewide races. So state house, state senate, and maybe the governor's race. But that money is separate from dues. And I do want to say, like, again, I think unions maybe have sometimes, the stereotype is true, right? Maybe there is a history of endorsing one party over another, but I will tell you that we come at it from a policy perspective. Like, how can I endorse a candidate whose stated position on the Senate floor is, if I could do this only to teachers unions, I would. We need to get rid of them. How would I be able to endorse that candidate? And it even comes down to the idea of funding. Like, Florida is 45th in the nation in per pupil funding. We are 50th in average teacher pay, soon to be 51st if I think it's Mississippi gets its act together. So we are 50th in average teacher pay. And again, so like when we talk about politics, and unfortunately we have to, because they make all the decisions, so we have to talk about it. But again, it's one of those things where, we endorse candidates whose policies benefit us. And I'm going to be completely honest and frank. Even though school board elections are kind of nonpartisan, we've endorsed Chris Patrica, who was a Republican. We endorsed Kathleen Morgan, who was a Republican. We've endorsed Melissa Giovanelli, who's a Republican. So it's one of those things where it's not like, especially under my leadership, it's an issues based thing, and it's a kitchen table based thing. And like, I'm going to back the best candidate, and I'm going to be honest with you. Sometimes I'm in a little bit of trouble with the Democratic Party because of that. But I'm just telling you, I'm going to endorse the candidate, and we're going to endorse the candidate through our path that is the best for our policy and for our teachers. And if that's a Republican, so be it. If it's an independent, so be it. And if it's a Democrat, so be it. And so I think there is a lot of that kind of noise out there around that. But again, I think also, I think that's just in general for whatever. Like, a certain group of people will pick on the teachers for who they give money to. Another group of people may pick on, the NRA for who they give money to, right? And again, I think it really, if you keep it issues oriented, it's easier to explain and easier to say, well, how can I give money to somebody who says we shouldn't exist? Or how can I give money to somebody who says, you're not the same as a firefighter or a corrections officer or a law enforcement officer? Because, I mean, Senator Martin, out of his own mouth, when pressed about the difference and why we're treating people differently, said one group puts on a bulletproof vest when they leave every morning. And so, like, how can we as a pack endorse somebody who feels like that
Yeah.
about us? And so and there are Republicans throughout the state that locals have endorsed, because it's an issues thing. It's not, it's really, we've kind of stayed away from that partisan stuff because it doesn't help. I mean, honestly, we have a diverse group of members in Lee County. Like Lee County is a really red county and is a really conservative county. And like I tell people, we hire teachers who live in our community. We don't bus people in on Monday mornings from California or New York and fly them home on Friday to be employees. The old
Yeah.
Matt Caldwell, the old tax collector's wife, was a teacher, right?
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
like she was in, and so like the teachers in the community are made up of the people who live here, and so of course the organization is gonna is gonna feel certain kind of ways, and it's really incumbent on us to tell people like, listen, we are taking stances, and we need you to consider how these people will affect your job, and the vote your job thing has kind of been a common theme throughout the years, to see what people are going to do for your job and for your livelihood as make decisions politically. And so that's where I think we are the best in kind of keeping it in that area. And we don't touch, I mean, there were some wacky rumors during the time of COVID, about supporting Black Lives Matter, and none of that was true. But again, we kind of live in they used to say, the lie gets it's halfway around the world before the truth has its opportunity to
Yeah.
put its pants on. But I think that's changed to the lie or the half truth gets embedded in people's heads before the truth has a chance to even look at
Yeah.
the alarm clock. And so what happens is you get these rumors started and they get reinforced in echo chambers. And, people traditionally are tribal and they maybe only pay attention to their own little echo chamber. And so it gets embedded. And then it's very difficult to offset that when in reality, there was no truth to it at all. So I think that's also something else we fight from a community perspective.
Yeah, well said. And talking about misconceptions, so I feel like let's rewind the clock back to 2020, 2021, right? COVID, and we're remote. Parents are home with their children. We kind of shut down, and I feel like public perception was teachers are heroes. Teacher, how can you
Right.
do this? Like there was this newfound appreciation for educators. I feel during that time, like you got people on TV. I can't believe what teachers, every day.
Right.
And then it kind of things kind of slowly kind of returned normal-ish. We made hybrid learning work for our students when we went back, and then it kind of seemed like over the last 2 or 3 years, I don't want to alienate listeners, but I feel like there's kind of been a little bit of a change in attitude towards
Yes.
educators, kind of we're now somewhat vilified to some degree. And I guess the question is, well, what misconceptions do you feel the public has towards, about teachers or towards the teaching profession that kind of went sour? It almost seems like just kind of gradually over the last few years recently. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So I'm just going to state something of fact, right? Like tomorrow is Friday, the 13th of March. And 6 years ago, the school district of Lee County went on spring break and we did not come back because of COVID. And I think it's important to realize that the union played a role in negotiating kind of the working conditions for teachers in a situation where, hindsight is always 2020, right? At the time, the district also agreed with what we were doing. And so, we in Lee County, at least, there were multiple options available for parents. And if a parent wanted their son or daughter or their kid to come to school, there was a teacher in a building for them. If a parent wanted a kid to have a hybrid model, there was a teacher available to make that happen. If they wanted to be exclusively virtual, there were teachers who were able to make that happen. And quite honestly, my oldest daughter was a senior that year, so she had the drive through graduation and all that other stuff. But my youngest daughter was a freshman. And so, we at first said, well, we're going to let her do hybrid, right? And so we found out very quickly that it wasn't what was best for her because she was taking class from her bed. She wasn't keeping up on assignments. She really needed the social aspect. So at the end of the first quarter, we let her go back to school. But I think some of the stuff that's out there, the misconception, the indoctrination and this and that and all this stuff, I think all of that is part of it. And I continue to come back to the idea that teachers are hired to teach the curriculum of the subject they teach. And so like I think it's I think I can say with confidence when I taught at World Palm, my students didn't know my politics because they don't belong in the classroom. If I'm teaching English, there's no reason for any of that to come in. If I'm teaching math, there's no reason. So I think, there's always in a sample size as big as educators around the country, which is, millions and millions of educators, right? There's almost always, but I would say this for every profession, right? There's almost always that one case you can point to where somebody did something wrong. And I think, instead of treating that as an outlier, I think sometimes the attention that gets paid to that is, well, if one person is doing it, all of them must be doing it. We just aren't able to know. I mean, at the height of COVID, there were parents who were screaming at administrators and confronting them on the bus ramp here in Lee County. Like it was not an easy time.
Yeah.
And so I think some of those misconceptions come around the idea that there is one example of it in a sample size of, 8, 9 million people. And the assumption is made that if there is one, it must be rampant. We just can't recognize it. So we're going to act like it's rampant. And I think, the indoctrination kind of false narrative is really the main one, you know, all that stuff is
Now,
really kind of what's going on.
yeah, it's well said. And now I got to say, Kevin, 50 years, the talc's been around, and we're so grateful as educators. Looking forward to the future, what gives you hope about the future of the teacher profession?
So I think the main thing that gives me hope is that we're still growing. Teachers are still teaching. I Uber, right? I Uber on the weekends. And so when I talk to people, I tell them I'm a teacher because, a lot of people don't understand like the union president thing. So I'm a teacher and we talk about teaching. And I always say, listen, the kids aren't the problem. The kids are essentially the kids. It's a little different since COVID, but the kids are the kids. It's really the grown-ups that really make it difficult for teachers to do the job they need to do, whether it's, building administrators, school board members, politicians, it's really, and it really comes from the idea that don't know the job, can't do the job, won't do the job, and won't listen. Like if you and I walked into the American Bar Association as teachers and said, well, you guys have to win 60% of your cases and you can't ever turn anybody down and you can't settle. And if you don't win 60% of your cases, we're going to take money from you and just fire you. They would look at us like we were crazy because we have no idea what it is to be a lawyer. But, consistently teachers kind of allow that usurping of their expertise. And I think that's where a lot of the problems are. And I think there's some real pushback on that now. And I think people are beginning to stand up more and more about that and kind of take the idea that just as a doctor is a medical professional, lawyer is a professional in the law, a dentist is a dental professional, teachers are educational professionals and have the specific training needed to do the job, just like any other profession. And I think the thing that gives me hope for the future is that people are really starting to react to that and hopefully are starting to take kind of the ownership of their profession back and the idea that they're the experts in what they do. And again, I think oftentimes, almost always teachers lead with their heart and not their head, which is sometimes problematic because, they'll stay late. They'll do things they wouldn't normally do for not being paid, but they're doing it for the kids. And sometimes
Yeah.
that's exploited, but that also to me reflects the idea that they really are in it for their students and want to see their students be as successful as possible. Because I've said this my whole time as president, public education is the greatest public good. I mean, libraries are great, cops, firefighters, they're all great, but public education is the greatest public good. It is really the equalizer. It is really the way through which social, gain can be made and you can lift yourself up out of poverty and into a different lifestyle. I mean, I'm on the foundation board and they do all these scholarships for kids. They have prepaid scholarships for kids who never would have had the opportunity and they get them a mentor and they set them up for success and they send these kids off to college who would never have the opportunity otherwise. And it's really an uplifting thing. And it really shows the power of public education to be life changing for individuals and families in Florida, in the United States. And we owe everybody, because I also say, like everybody, even if you don't have a kid in the school system, you've got some fight some skin in the game, because when you go to your doctor's office, odds are, the CNA might have graduated from South Fort Myers High School's medical program, like my two oldest daughters did. Or when you take your dog to the vet tech might be somebody who graduated from South's vet program, like my youngest daughter did. And so we provide essentially the employees for the entire county. And so I think it's incumbent on everyone to be invested in how well we do that. And we do a really great job. And so I think everybody, even if you've retired here from up north and your kids went through school somewhere else, odds are when you're at that restaurant, that waiter or wait staff or whomever, or that manager or at a doctor's office, odds are that person is a product of the Lee County Public Schools. And everybody has the right to have the best graduates they have, whether they're directly connected or not. And I think that whole like working together to make that happen is kind of what gives me hope, and the idea that teachers are starting to reassert themselves as the professionals that they are.
Trust us to do our job. Trust us as
That's
professionals
it.
that we
Right.
are.
Right. Trust
I
us. Right.
can't
Trust
scream
us
it
as the
from the
professionals we are.
rooftops. Scream it from the
And
rooftops.
again, I
Trust
mean,
us.
there are times when people need support, right? But again, I would argue that runs the gamut of any profession. I would say as a first year attorney, you're probably not as good as you are when you become a 10th year attorney. And so, we have specific programs in place to mentor first year people. And, if they're struggling, we just started kind of a professional learning program, which was one of the last things I wanted to do before, but we had two hurricanes and COVID. So I hadn't really been able to do it, but somebody stepped up and said they would do it. So we're starting this professional learning thing with the Teachers Association of Lee County. So again, we're all about supporting educators and producing the best educators we have, because we know nothing affects student performance like a highly effective, well-trained, certified educator in every classroom. And making everybody that is really kind of what we do as well. I mean, the 27 Yankees existed, right? Everybody wants the 27 Yankees, but the 27 Yankees didn't just happen. They were coached and they were brought up and they were supported. And so that's also kind of what we do in some of our work. And we need to ensure that everybody has the best teacher they can possibly have. And some of that honestly has to do with compensation and insurance and retirement and working conditions, right? If we get all those things right, we will be able to get better quality employees. I always go back to The Right Stuff, the movie about the Mercury program. And, there's a line in there that says, no Buck, still Buck Rogers, right? And so in order to get the best talent, we have to be competitive in what we offer, and not only salary, but benefits and working conditions. And so that's another thing. That's one of our things, is how do we retain and recruit the best talent we possibly can, given some of the parameters the state has for us. But how do we retain and recruit the best talent? And that's kind of part of what we deal with in negotiations, and provide perspective and pushback to the district when they sometimes want to do stuff that doesn't make sense.
And for those that are listening, that are thinking about becoming an educator, teacher, I'm going to just say this is just my own like pet peeve, like personal thing. I cringe when people say, well, did get into teaching for the money? And I feel like, okay, yes, we are servants, right? Servant hearts, servant leadership as educators. Like there's a reason why we do what we do, right?
Right.
However, that does not mean that it is acceptable to be poorly paid or underpaid, because I think that was the biggest kind of misnomer forever, was just, well, nobody gets into teacher for the money. Okay, well, obviously, because there's, but I feel like that's something that we can no longer use that as an excuse and be like, okay, they'll just suck it up because they're doing it just because they have the heart for this, and just, but we still have families and ourselves to
Right.
support.
Right. Absolutely. And so like, again, the idea of one job should pay the bills, right? You should have health insurance that's reasonably priced and effective, and you should have a quality retirement for later in life. So you're not destitute after giving your best years of your life to serving other people's children. And you should be able to take a vacation. And I do think that I think nobody does get into it for the money, typically, but I also think that doesn't mean you should be expected to accept a poverty wage, right?
Well said.
And,
Yes.
and have to, and not be able to provide and support your family because again, a teacher that has one job is probably more effective in their day to day life than a teacher who has a day job and then tends bar or waits tables or Ubers or, it just
Absolutely.
makes common sense that if I have one job that pays the bills, I'm going to be better at that one job than whether or not I have to worry about, closing down the restaurant at 10:30, 11 o'clock at night on a Sunday and then coming into work the next day at 7 o'clock. I mean,
Mhm.
and the way that gets solved is that we, again, average is 50th in Florida. And like I said, when Mississippi gets their act together, we'll be 51st. And I think for a state that is, I think the third largest economy in the United States and continues to brag about having money left over in the budget, I think it's embarrassing to say or to admit that you're 50th in the nation in average teacher pay. I think that's embarrassing. And everybody should want to fix that because again, if we get the salaries up, we'll be able to get, because again, I argue against the idea of teacher shortage. I think there are plenty of people out there who would be effective at the job who just aren't willing to do the job for the money and the stuff that it takes to do it these days. I mean, I think there are plenty of people out there that could be teachers, but when they look at the pay and other things, they go, well, I'm not going to
Yeah.
do all that. And so when we fix that, we'll get to the idea that we'll have a better kind of overall crop of people, that come into the profession. And again, I think it also has to do with, again, people all the time talk about how much money people make up north. Well, I'm going to tell you something. You may be able to talk about this specifically because you came from New York City. They tax the heck out of you.
Uh,
And so government has one kind of way to get money, and that's through taxation. And whether you like it or not, that's the way they're doing it. And public schools are really funded a lot through property taxes. And there's a lot of conversation about cutting property taxes in the legislative session. And they've all said they're going to do something to cut property taxes. But then you have to look at, well, how does that affect a school district's ability to pay its bills? And so when we have this aversion to taxation, and this it's almost like, well, of course teacher salaries aren't good because the state is unwilling to raise the necessary funds or is unwilling to spend the funds they have in a way that makes it a priority because there's that old line, right? Show me your budget and I'll show you my priorities. I'll show you your priorities. And so that's another part of it too. But I think we really need to get a handle on this idea that being 50th in the nation out of 51 is pretty embarrassing. And we can certainly do better, and everybody wants us to do better. And so that should be universal, right? That shouldn't have a party affiliation.
no, not at all. I couldn't say any better myself. And then I gotta say, wrapping up this episode, Kevin, just one final thought. If there's just one message that you would want teachers or parents or the community to hear right now, what would it be?
I think for me, it's the idea and this is like High School Musical. I have girls, so they love High School Musical, right? We're all in this together, right?
Yeah.
We're all in this together. We take people's most precious commodity, their children. Right? I can't think of anything. And if you have a kid, there's probably nothing that's more important to you than that child, right? Whether they're yours biologically or you adopted them, or there's nothing more important to you. And so we're responsible for that child for a portion of the day. And so as much as people with parent rights ideas say it's not a partnership, I think the best relationships I had with my students and the most effective that I was with my ESE students was when we really had a partnership with the parent and we could talk about things and we could move things and do things together. And so I think the thing that we really need to get back to is the idea that public school is still the best option. It's really the greatest public good. And parents should be involved in their kids' education. Absolutely. I mean, there's nothing better than going to an open house and seeing 90% of the parents there, right? Having parent volunteers in the room, having people in the room to volunteer. Like all of this stuff is wonderful. And so we need to get back to the idea that we're all in it for one thing, and that's to produce the best public school graduates we can here in Lee County and make them successful in whatever they want to do as a grown up, whether it's going to college, whether it's going to the military, whether it's going straight to the workforce, or whether it's going into a trade. we need to ensure that our number one priority is working together to get that final product of his child after they cross the stage in 12th grade as ready as they can be to be a successful adult. And that's going to take us all. And that's going to take us all working together and loving each other and making it happen the best way we can. And that's what I think kind of brings us back to saving the profession and saving public education and kind of getting away from this idea that, somehow the teachers are the enemy or, that doesn't make any sense. And so I think that's the way we bring it all together is to focus on the students and how do we make them the best they can be and set them up for whatever success they want because there is success for everybody in every endeavor. Not every kid needs to go to college. Not every kid needs to go into a trade. There are 8 million paths for people. And there are kids at Dunbar High that are right now doing coding and Microsoft stuff, and they're getting good jobs. There are kids at South in the welding program graduating, making 50, $60,000 a year at 18 as, certified welders. And so there are a million paths in Lee County for students to be successful. And it's incumbent on all of us to work together to make sure that those students that are in the school system get the help they need, get the education they need, and then get supported in the direction they want to go to become the best adults they can be and the most productive citizens. Because that's really what helps us all is the idea that we focus on productive citizenship and doing the best job we can to educate kids.
Well said. And especially that partnership, right? We're a school community. Well, Kevin,
Right.
it's been an absolute pleasure speaking to you this evening and just learning more about your role as president of the Teachers Association of Lee County, Talc, 50 years of Talc's existence. Looking forward to the future, advocacy for teachers, supporting new teachers, veteran teachers. Just personally, thank you as a teacher in Lee County for all that you and the fellow officers and members and employees of Health, Island Host, FEA, everyone, just Dr. Rizone, just everybody's amazing. The bargaining team. So just personally, for me, thank you for all that you do. And we are definitely optimistic. I know we're kind of got some rough seas ahead with it, but I feel personally as well that we will see this through as educators, and we'll navigate these rough seas and come out eventually to calmer waters together, stronger than before. So that's my hope, and I know hope of many other educators in our state and our county. Thank you. For those that are listening, I'm Joe Camps. This is my host, president of the Teacher Association of Lee County, Kevin Daly. This is season 4, episode 2 of the No-Frills Teacher Podcast, Leadership, Advocacy, and the Future of Teaching. You all have a good night. Bye.